Hello and welcome to the big picture. The Andhra Pradesh High Court has set aside the state government's decision to pay compensation to 70 Muslim youths who had been falsely implicated in the Mecca-masjid blasts of May 2007. The state government, on the recommendation of the National Commission for Minorities, had paid last year a compensation of rupees 70 lakhs to these youths. The first time ever it has been done. All the youths had been falsely implicated in the terror attack on Mecca-masjid and had allegedly been tortured and held in custody for several months and some for over a year too. Later it was found that the attacks had been carried out by some Hindu fundamentalist group, following which these Muslim youths had been discharged and acquitted. The AP High Court, however, on Tuesday found that the state government's decision to pay compensation was without any legal basis and has asked the amount paid to these youths to be recovered from them. The state government has of course indicated that it would appeal against the order. However, many questions have cropped up about the legality or otherwise of paying compensation to wrongfully detained persons, whether it should be extended to all and not just those who have suffered in terror cases, and whether such compensation really helps those who have suffered to redeem their reputation. We will discuss all this today with Vikas Singh, former Additional Solicitor General of India, Kamal Farooqui, member All India Muslim Personal Law Board, Vinod Sharma, a senior journalist and former member National Commission for Minorities, and Parsa Venkateshwar Jr., editorial consultant DNA. And on the phone line from Mumbai is Teesta Setalvad, social activist. Welcome to all of you. I would like to go to Mr. Vikas Singh first. Mr. Vikas Singh, this decision of the High Court, you think that they have a point when they say that there has been no legal basis for paying this kind of a compensation?
Well, I haven't read the judgment, but what I feel on the basis of the law as it stands today,
yes,
according to me, this kind of a compensation payment will not be justified. And I think the High Court is absolutely right in setting aside such a direction. I feel that the state government, this is a case where only if it is found to be a case of a malicious prosecution, which will have to be tried in a proper court of law, and only if it is found that, supposing for instance the person who registered the FIR or the state police, if they registered the case maliciously to falsely implicate somebody, and on that basis if a false implication has taken place and then finally acquitted, then somebody can be granted compensation. But merely because somebody was wrongly put in jail and after investigation or after further investigation it was found that somebody else was actually involved, but if the leads at the initial point of time were credible and there cannot be any, if there was no malice in implicating these people, then there can't be any compensation for being inside jail for the reason that it was later on found that they were not the real culprits and somebody else had actually committed the terror activity. And secondly, this kind of a thing will also send a wrong signal, because if you do it for a particular community only, there are other people in the other community also who are in many cases falsely implicated. So if they have not been given compensation, to selectively give out compensation to a certain community also will be constitutionally impermissible. Okay. So on these two counts, I feel that the High Court judgment should be right, although probably their reasoning may be different. I have not read that judgment.
Okay. Vinod, you were part of the National Commission for Minorities till recently, and the state government's decision to pay compensation was based on the recommendation of the National Commission for Minorities. What was the basis on which the National Commission had made this recommendation?
Well, I wasn't a member of the team, fact-finding team that went to Andhra, but what I can recall is that there was to the National Commission of Minorities, in the eyes of the National Commission of Minorities, these people who were put behind bars were deeply wronged by the investigators. And mind you, this is not the only case where Muslim youth have been wrongly arrested or implicated in cases.
It has happened all over the...
We have this in the case of Samjhauta, which is under investigation. Then in Malegaon,
Jaipur,
this is Malegaon blast, to name a few. And now there are further reports based on interrogation of a prominent terrorist, Bhatkar, that many other cases where people have been arrested, they have been wrongly arrested. There was a very, very extensive investigation done by a very young journalist who formerly worked for 2 television channels and who's now launched a blog of his own.
Yes.
That there were material available with different police forces. While the case was before a particular high court, a police force in a different state arrested someone, and that person admitted to a crime for which someone else is facing prosecution and is under trial in another high court. Now, there was no coordination, there was no collation of information, and thereby there was gross miscarriage of justice. Now, you see, the National Commission of Minorities, I don't speak for it, but I can share with you my experiences. It's a quasi-judicial authority.
Right.
And unlike the law, which is blind, the National Commission of Minorities is not blind.
Right.
Its task is not to be blind. You can argue that whether this case should have been dealt with by the National Human Rights Commission.
Yes.
Because as Mr. Vikas Singh points out, that police excesses are common to communities, you know.
Exactly.
You can argue that. But once this case was brought to the notice of the National Commission of Minorities, it in its wisdom decided to send a fact-finding mission, and on the strength of what they got to know there, they recommended to the state government that these young men, because the guiding impulse behind such recommendations is to get these people integrated back into the national mainstream,
right,
into the society,
right,
so that they don't get misled, that they don't get radicalized, that they fall into the hands of wrong people and start acting in a manner which is truly and rightly in violation of the law.
Okay, let me get Teesta Setalvad in on this. Teesta, you have been, you had a lot of experience dealing with such kind of cases. But here was a situation where the Andhra Pradesh High Court, for the first time ever, paid compensation to these Muslim youth, 70 of them, and now the court says that it has no legal basis. You cannot pay this kind of compensation. And as Vikas Singh, you must have heard what Vikas Singh said also.
Yes, of course. Yes.
Right.
No, actually, first of all, I got some news of this judgment yesterday, but like I would prefer to read the entire judgment before commenting. But I just like to point out 3 or 4 things. One is that, that if there is if of course it has been argued and proved that there is some malicious basis for the incarceration of these youth, because I recall very clearly that some of the Mecca-masjid youth were not simply wrongly picked up, and it was not simply oversight by the investigating agencies, but there was a fair amount of institutionalized bias in the actions of the police, and there was also pretty inhuman torture involved.
Right.
So I think one would like to look very carefully at the judgment before giving a reasoned reaction. But I immediately recall what the Australian government did a few years back, when I think an engineer, Hanif, from Bangalore, who was picked up wrongly,
right,
and they not only granted compensation, but they did not even divulge the amount in a very gracious act, because it was only left between the government and the family.
Right.
So I think, we are living, unfortunately, in a very polarized India. If you look at what's happening in Muzaffarnagar, you look at the way political parties are trying to score brownie points in competitive communalism.
Right.
And I know that there's minority communalism as much as majority communalism, but I think we need to really ask ourselves as a system of justice delivery that if there is institutionalized discrimination or bias that is proved against a certain section of our people, then terror-related cases tend to leave a certain stigma that other crimes do not leave.
Okay.
It is very difficult for people, young people, then to get their jobs back. I know of a case in Kanpur, for instance, where a youth has been acquitted after 8 years, and a very well, highly circulated Hindi newspaper still continues to refer him as an Atangwad.
Right.
So I think these are certain issues, and I'm sorry to talk in such a hurry, but I might need to sign off because I'm traveling this now.
Okay,
I
okay.
hope you don't mind.
Okay,
Yeah?
thanks, Teesta. Thanks for joining
Thank
us.
you for this
But I think
Thank
you have made some important points there. Let me come to Kamal Farooqui. Mr. Farooqui, one important thing which Mr. Vikas Singh said was that there has to be some, a malicious prosecution has to be proved. You think that these were cases of malicious prosecution?
I was about to talk about Mr. Vikas Singh. In both the counts, I am agreeing with him.
Yes.
That yes, it has to be proved that maliciously they were implicated or not. In this particular case, yes, they were maliciously implicated. I know very well that on the day when the whole thing had happened in Mecca-masjid, within 10 minutes, even the injured people and the dead people were not even removed from there, and immediately we got the news from the TV media that it was some Muslim organization, something of that kind. And then later on, the police did all those kind of things which they do it, maliciously implicating them, torturing, inhuman activities and whatnot, they have done it. So it is a fact of malicious implication. On this count, yes, everybody should get a compensation. And he raised that it should not be for a particular company. I am 100% agreeing with this. Anybody, any Indian who is being falsely implicated for this, these kind of compensation has to be given. And third thing is, these compensations, to me, in fact, there has to be a change in the law. These compensations should be recovered from all those police officers who wrongly implicated them, because they are the culprit.
In fact, it's very interesting that some of the youths refuse the compensation,
yes,
saying that unless you recover it from
actually, we would like to see a day when, like in Muzaffarnagar, yesterday we have seen. I do not know how far the whole listing operation is correct or not, but yesterday we have seen it. At least 14 officers have said that we were asked to change the orders and whatnot. What for whom they are working? Are they working for a particular government, or are they working under the constitution? They must be answered. All those 14 people who have come on record, all of them should be prosecuted. And if they have done anything wrong to any Hindu or Muslim or anybody, they should be penalized for it. The amount should be recovered from them.
Okay, Parsa, the Andhra Pradesh government. Why do you think the Andhra Pradesh government did this? Went ahead and paid this compensation. They were the first government to do it. You think there was some politics behind it, or you think that there was a sincere attempt to, give some kind of comfort to these boys who had been wrongly implicated?
No, at the political level, yes, there is motive to sort of appease and all that. But the question, I think we have to move beyond Hindu, Muslim, minority, non-minority. We have to look at the legal aspect of it.
Yes.
And I think the Andhra Pradesh High Court, within the bounds of law, they found that this kind of payment will be a problem.
Right.
Now we have to come to the general question that in this country, police arrest people indiscriminately,
right,
in all cases. Police do not implicate people indiscriminately, and innocents get punished, innocents get detained for no fault of their own.
And are incarcerated for years.
So what we need is a law passed by a legislature saying what should be done in cases of these kind of a thing.
Right.
I mean, I think that kind of a general reform is required. Secondly, in the case of whether there is a malicious intent or not, yes, I think that's a very valid reason to look into. But what we have to accommodate for the police is, the police are under a pressure. They are forced to make arrests, right and wrong, and sometimes they do go wrong terribly, perhaps not maliciously. So we have to provide some scope for them. In the French law, they have this droit administratif, where a person doing his duty by virtue of his position in the government and acts in good faith but goes wrong,
right,
then he's not culpable.
Right.
So perhaps we have to look at some of these complicated issues and go beyond it. But I think we have to go beyond this minority-majority community issue. This is a legal issue. It is a citizen being wrongfully detained.
But since this case involved those Muslim youths and it was related to a particular incident which had happened, so I think we are discussing it in that context and we can't avoid that. Let me get Mr. Vikas Singh. I just want to bring to your notice that National Commission for Minorities, when it gave its report on this, and when it recommended this compensation, it said that they had been targeted. These boys had been targeted and ill-treated because they belong to a particular community. This was the report of the National Commission for Minorities, and on the basis of which they said that that's why compensation needs to be provided to these boys.
No, that's the only point is, I don't know, maybe the High Court may have struck down the payment of compensation on the basis that the National Commission for Minority may not have examined this matter in the manner in which a judicial court would have done. Now, in a judicial court, probably there would be parties, like the prosecution would also be arrayed as a party, and they would be also permitted to lead evidence as to what they really had before them, and the witnesses would be cross-examined, and it's only after a proper detailed legal examination that a view can be taken that it was a case of malicious prosecution or not. Certainly, if it's a case of malicious prosecution, I feel that there should be, and if it is rightly provided for, giving some kind of compensation. But then the other aspect also, I agree with Mr. Farooqui,
yes,
that ultimately the officers who have actually engineered to arrest these people by making out a false case should not be allowed to go scot-free. Ultimately, why should the state pay on their behalf?
Absolutely.
So some kind of a departmental action and some kind of recovery proceeding against them also should be initiated if it is established in a court of law that they actually generated or they created evidence for the purpose of maliciously prosecuting some people just to show that they have solved the matter.
Right, Mr. Vikas.
The problem is that the police is in its anxiety to solve cases.
Mr. Vikas Singh, my question is, taking forward what Parsa said, we don't have a law in this country for this kind of compensation, but there is a problem because, which are the cases, which are the instances in which we would like to pay compensation, and which are the instances, because the High Court said very clearly yesterday that just because these people were acquitted or discharged in a criminal case, they can't get compensation. So, you think a law, the time has come for some kind of a law to be enacted on this as far as these issues are concerned?
Well, I don't think there is a requirement of a specific law to deal with this kind of an issue, because our general law of damages will definitely cover a case of damage of this nature as well. And secondly, as far as the protection to the police officers is concerned, what Mr. Parthasarthi pointed out about what is happening in France, similar protection is here under the IPC and the CRPC also. Here also, before doing anything against a police officer, you have to take sanction of the state government or the central government, depending on which force is to be prosecuted. So that law is already there in this country, and even the damage law is there. But basically, my view is that policing needs to be improved in this country. Policing is quite bad.
Absolutely. That's a larger issue. I agree that's a larger issue. But
the police reforms has been pending for a long time.
Right. Yeah. Yes, Mr. Farooqui.
Now, my brother has said about the good faith.
Right.
Yes, we agree that any officer who is doing it in a good faith, he must get a protection under the law. But we know it. They have been fabricating the cases. They have been doing all those kind of creating wrong incidents, just like in the Nimesh Commission recently. Just yesterday in the UP Assembly, it has been presented. No, please let me know. But they fabricated a case like this. They arrested the person on 27th December. Both this Khalid, who has been who is murdered or killed or dead, and the other person Tariq, who is still alive and is in the jail. They arrested them from the house on 27th December, but they showed the whole thing on 26th November. It's a clear case of fabrication.
Right.
Why should we have any sympathy for these kind of officers who are the dishonest officers?
Vinod, coming back to you, this is, the National Commission for Minorities, as you rightly earlier pointed out, it's not just a, it's a quasi-judicial body, but it has a larger, approach, a perspective to things. So when it takes up such cases, has the Minority Commission at any point of time spoken about, having a law of this kind? Because Mr. Vikas Singh says that there are already laws, but he talks of a law of damages. We have not heard of who has been, who has got any damage from any of these cases from using that law.
You see, may I tell you one thing? I think this matter need not be, with due regard for the views expressed on this panel, this matter cannot be discussed strictly within the four walls of the law as it exists today in our country.
Right.
Because law has been able to do precious little. You see, this instance is a microcosm of a general trend that you see around yourself. We talk about police reforms. What kind of police reforms will you have in a society which is wearing around to the idea of encounters, which ends up defending a police encounters?
Right.
What kind of a police reform will you expect in that society? So where the general trend is to for the police to be the prosecutor and the decider of the offence and then the executioner. I mean, we have to think about it more creatively. And I think for that, rather than the law, a level of consciousness has to be constructed in our society, and that can be done by NGOs, by political parties, by giving an assurance and coming to an understanding that they shall not politically exploit these incidents for political gain, which happens all the while. Indeed, if some minority member is arrested, some political party will raise noise and he may get released. Similarly, the majority, they too have their defenders. It is not the question of a person being from a majority or a minority. It's the question whether or not he is guilty in the eyes of the law, whether or
Absolutely.
not he is a person who has commissioned the offence or done the offence. And if you are going to prosecute and put behind bars for years on end, Himayat Beg, take the case. This man is facing death sentence. And today there is a big question mark whether actually he was rightly prosecuted or wrongly prosecuted.
Absolutely.
I mean, it's amazing. I mean, we can't be deciding this within the four walls of the law.
Mr.
You have to do it differently.
Mr. Vikas Singh, do you agree with what Vinod says, and also the fact that we have to look beyond what the laws which are existing, and in this case the Andhra Pradesh High Court saying that it doesn't have any basis legally, but when you look at why the National Commission of Minorities took up this case, because there were these 70 youths who had been wrongly it has been proved that they have been acquitted. The National Investigation Agency has said that they were wrongly implicated, and then they were tortured. They lost their jobs. Now, how do they redeem their life? Is this not just
Girish,
one part of an attempt by the society to see that they redeem their life also?
Okay, one point I want to add before Mr. Singh answers. Mr. Singh, these are 70 people, and you don't have evidence against any one of them. You arrested 70 people. Is it not an obvious case of gross miscarriage of justice?
Okay, let us, yes, Mr. Singh.
Well, I would like to go sequentially.
Yes.
The first point is with regard to police reforms. Now, if you have a system where the political masters of the country, 50% or 40% of them are themselves, accused of some serious cases and some not so serious cases, and if you have the police working under them, and if you have the police taking orders for them, then what kind of policing do you expect in this country? So the police reforms is a very, very major issue. Unless you separate the police from the political masters, make them independent, make their functioning transparent, ensure that they have complete freedom in the manner in which they perform. I mean, you can't expect that these 70 boys who are wronged is only because the police officers wanted to take the investigation in a particular direction. Yeah. And most of the time you will see that this direction is basically because the political masters want them to take that particular direction. So they fabricate evidence to conjure up a case to please their political masters, whoever they are at that point of time. So the police reform is a very, very major issue. Unless that is addressed in this country, these kind of malicious prosecutions will continue to happen and our youths will continue to suffer. Now, as far as the Minorities Commission is concerned, they are in some sense have a tunnel vision. They are not looking at the larger picture. They are looking at a particular problem of the minorities. Now, when you look at a problem of a minority, and when you realize that what you are saying, qua minority, has to be applied across the board to everybody in this country, then probably your approach may be very different. So if you are only taking the view what happens to minorities and then making a recommendation, if that recommendation is accepted, simpliciter on the basis that a recommendation has come which has already held that the prosecution was completely biased or illegal or malicious, then I think you are missing out the larger picture.
No,
so that way, Minority Commission may be very well justified in expressing its anguish that a very, very, grave wrong has happened to these youths. But at the same time, whether simpliciter because of that wrong compensation is to be paid, probably the courts have taken a view that no, that is not the way in which the report of the commission is to be acted upon. So I think that's the reason. But I can, of course, give a better comment, informed comment after I read the judgment of the High Court.
So you essentially feel that compensation in such cases are not justified.
No, maybe justified. I'm not saying that are not justified, but simpliciter on the basis of the minorities commission may not be justified.
Yeah, but
it has
to apply to
followed by a more detailed inquiry.
And it has to apply to all, and it can't be just applied to.
If you are giving compensation to the youth, then at this, firstly and secondly, it should be in a manner where when you give compensation, you simultaneously also identify who are the people who are responsible for ensuring that these innocent boys are arrested. It can't be a one-sided affair. It has to be.
Okay, Parsa, I don't think we can have any quarrel with what he says. That have two-sided approach. Identify who are the people who have been affected because of this, and who are responsible for it. But all this needs a separate law, right?
It needs a separate law. And secondly, I think we are too eager to blame the political masters or the communal organizations for creating trouble. I think the policing itself has to change its approach, the
mindset of the police.
Yeah, I mean, forget about the larger police reforms and all that. The police in India, because of the colonial heritage and all that, go about in a vindictive and a very, very rapacious manner in dealing with criminals.
Right.
And I'm not speaking only of terror acts or communal riots. Even in ordinary cases, ordinary pickpocket is implicated in a murder case.
Yes.
We know that. And nothing is done to stop it, or nothing is done to find out how to sort of minimize it, unless there is a change of sensitization in the police force of a certain kind.
Absolutely. But Mr. Farooqui and Vinod, both of you, very quickly, last words. You think that this kind of when we talk of these kind of cases, as far as terror cases are concerned, we need to look at them differently, and there need to be some kind of a law to safeguard people.
We already have law.
We have
for terrorists. We have
for compensation. I'm talking about.
But as far as the compensation is concerned, both in case of the terrorist activity or in the communal violence. Right. In communal violence, we have already been demanding the UP1 that bring out the commitment what you had done.
The criminal violence bill talks about compensation and reparation.
Same thing, compensation and plus fixing the responsibility, accountability of the police officers.
Right.
Once the fear is there in their mind, definitely they will not be listening to
Vinod.
No, I think that, I must respond to Mr. Singh's comment that the commission has a tunnel vision. Actually, it is under the law. I mean, there is a National Commission of Minorities Act where the commission is mandated to look into the affairs of the minorities and their problems. And in fact, the commission has been arguing and making a case that it should have jurisdiction over all kinds of minorities,
not just
even the Hindu minority, in areas where they are actually in a numerical minority. And for that, I think the Parliament will have to take another look at the NCM Act. It is the only bipartisan commission in this country, sir. Women's Commission is bipartisan. So SC Commission is bipartisan. Human Rights Commission is bipartisan. So you see how difficult is the work of the commission.
Okay. I think, Vinod, on understanding the problem of the commission, we will have to wind up here. But the fact is that this case will come up to the Supreme Court, and we'll have to wait and watch how the apex court will react to it. But this is an issue which will need further debate, as all my panelists have today said. Thanks to all my guests, Mr. Vikas Singh, Parsa Venkateshwar Rao Jr., Kamal Farooqui, and Vinod Sharma, and Teesta Setalvad also, who had joined us earlier. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue on Big Picture same time tomorrow.